Hi everybody, it's meteorologist Joe Cioffi on this Friday, July the 6th, coming up on 5 minutes before 6 o'clock Eastern Time. I had scheduled this live stream for 6 o'clock, but had a little bit of extra time, so I figured why not just start early, and I think that's was a good idea on my part. Let me, from the get-go, just say right up front, for those of you who are watching, we're going into hurricane season now, and with systems beginning to pop up in the Atlantic, we have a new tropical depression in the Atlantic off the southeast coast of the United States, and we also have Hurricane Beryl, which to me is just an absolutely remarkable system, which we'll talk about, of course, and get into all the things that are going on with respect to that. But I just want to say it now so that if it becomes a threat at some point, with regards to asking me specific questions when it comes time, if it comes time that a hurricane is threatening your area and asking me specific questions, I'm not really in any position to answer specifically. You know your own area much better than I do. So this is a job for the National Weather Service and for your local government officials. So always direct your questions regarding what you should do and the decisions that you need to make to those people. Unfortunately, I won't be able to answer your questions. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I evacuate? Should I not evacuate? You need to ask those people. So let's make sure I put that out there right off the bat. Now, why don't we start off with the system that is off the southeast coast, because that is the one that is closest to the United States. And I'm bringing up the the visible satellite loop. And if you look very closely, there are actually three things here that are in play. The first thing, of course, is right in the middle of the picture, which is the new the loop, which is the new tropical depression. To the west of that, if you look right along the Georgia coast, that spinning system, that is an upper air storm that started out southeast of Bermuda and has been moving westward over the last number of days, and it has completely separated itself from all that convection that was off the southeast coast, and it is also acting as a bit of a steering mechanism for this to drift it toward the north-northwest, which it is doing at about 3 or 4 miles an hour. One of the important thing that was missing up until this afternoon was, if you look near the top, you can see the clouds are moving counterclockwise. There's been a low-level circulation with this since yesterday, but the thunderstorms were all to the south, well to the southeast and east of the center. During this afternoon, you can actually see thunderstorms blowing up where the circulation center is. So it is now being classified as a tropical depression. To the north and west of that, you can see the cold front that is now moving through the northeast and into the northern mid-Atlantic states, and the big dome of dry air that's up over the Great Lakes that's coming down out of Canada. This is going to be pressing southward. The depression is going to likely get trapped to the south of that, and steering currents in the upper atmosphere are just going to collapse. And we'll talk about that a bit more when I bring up the GFS a little bit later. But this is going to probably be there off the southeast coast into early next week, and I think it stands a very good chance of becoming a tropical storm over the weekend. Right now, no threat to any land, and I think in the long term, it's probably not going to be a problem, although it may come relatively close to the North Carolina coast, and it will probably be a marine issue. But I don't foresee it being a problem with regards to even when it becomes, because I think it will become a tropical storm. I don't see it being a problem as moving up the east coast, because the upper air pattern, I think, is going to argue against that. And again, we'll also talk about that in just a bit. So let's now go to Beryl, and I'm going to bring up the hurricane, the first hurricane of the season. It is also the second earliest hurricane in the tropical Atlantic on record, and it's certainly the earliest in the satellite era. And also, it is so incredibly small that it is entirely conceivable. If you go before we had satellites and before we were able to see this stuff, it is entirely conceivable that we could have had a number of tropical storms and hurricanes over the course of history that were never observed and never knew they existed. Now, look at this loop, and I want you to look at the side where it says 10N. That's 10 degrees north latitude, okay? The next latitude line up is 12 degrees north. That is 120 nautical miles between those 2 points. This system fits very neatly inside that 120 nautical mile distance. And the same goes with the longitude, also running about 100 or so nautical miles. This thing is very small. The area of gales basically extends out about 45 or 50 miles in diameter, and that's it. It's very, very tiny. When you have systems like this, you could see rapid changes in intensity in both directions, and this is what we've seen from yesterday. It strengthened very rapidly. It went from being treated as a tropical wave to a hurricane at the beginning of the day to a hurricane by the end of the day. And a strong tropical storm by the end of the day, and then became a hurricane overnight. It could weaken just as quickly, but it's kind of encased in its own environment of light wind shear, and as a result, it is holding its own. Weather models are still all forecasting this to weaken, although they are taking a bit longer for that to happen. And I think you may certainly see tropical storm conditions move over the Leeward Islands late in the weekend, although you might have to have this thing move directly over a specific island in order to have any kind of impact. And the Leewards are very sensitive, obviously, for obvious reasons, with regards to these tropical systems. And here you have the GFS. Now, you can see both. This is Beryl in the lower right corner, and then as you go to the north, go toward the left and up toward the top off the North Carolina coast, and you can see the depression there. Beryl on the GFS takes a west-northwest track. It's still identifiable, and probably, at least from the standpoint of the GFS, it looks like it has it as a tropical storm, but look how small it is, how very, very tight. I mean, if you look at the isobars around the depression, and you look at the isobars around around Beryl, you could easily fit that system inside the circulation of the tropical depression. Now, it is forecast to move over the islands into the northeast Caribbean, and then still identifiable at 78 hours, which is on Monday evening. In the meantime, here's our depression, and I'll start it from the beginning. It really just kind of drifts toward the North Carolina coast and then just comes to a halt, okay, and then meanders there up into Monday night. This, I think, is because of the fact that we're going to have this very weak steering current along the east coast of the United States. And let's, at this point, I'm going to switch over. We're going to talk about the upper air and why we're not really overly concerned about this at the moment. So let's just go back here, and we'll start from today, because we do have this upper trough that is coming through into the northeast, and you can see that there's a ridge to the west. That upper trough never really drops far enough south to pick up Beryl at all. It kind of hangs out up to the north, moves off of off New England and off of the coast of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And let me illustrate this for you here. I'll bring it up on the paint box in a moment. Okay, let's set this up. There we have it. Okay, so this is the upper air. This is for Saturday evening, and here's what's happening. When you look at, here's the trough in the east that is going by, that's bringing our cold front through now. There it is right here. You've got northwest winds at 18,000 feet coming down into New York State, into New Jersey. You also have the periphery here. This is the edge of the big upper high that is now residing out in the west. Okay, and you can see its finger there pointing out into the plain states. So there's your upper level winds as they go around that upper high. Out in the Atlantic, you've got this also the western edge of the Atlantic ridge right there, and the winds are south-southwest. Your depression is kind of trapped here, and it's in no man's land. Okay, there's nothing. The steering currents here are extremely weak, so there's nothing really to go and force it to go in any particular direction. And it may be subject eventually, it could be subject to subtleties that we may not be seeing. One of the things that we want to remember is that we're still going to have the remnants of the upper low that is very much obvious on the satellite loop that I showed you earlier. Sometimes models weaken these upper lows way too fast, so we want to at least watch over the weekend if that winds up being the case, because you can certainly make a case for the fact that if that upper low is more prominent and just kind of sits there over northeastern Florida, southern Georgia, that this could wind up perhaps pushing this a bit more toward the northwest and a bit closer to the coast. So I think that's something that we're going to have to pay a little bit of attention to going forward. Now let me come back to the GFS at this point, and we can take a look at the upper air going into next week. Now what happens is, this is now as we move into Sunday and Monday, then you've got by Tuesday another trough that's dropping down over into the Great Lakes, and it appears, at least if you want to believe the GFS, that trough should be strong enough to pick up this. At this point will probably be a tropical storm and move it on out to the northeast. Some of the earlier runs were actually intensifying this into a hurricane in time, but perhaps that would happen after it's long gone. So here's how it looks on the surface, and you can see that it just sits here all weekend and into next week, and then starts to get kicked out to the east-northeast as that next upper trough and cold front move into the northeast. And that front, by the way, looks to be relatively weak, certainly not going to bring the air mass change like we're seeing for this weekend. And by the way, going back, here is the big high that's coming in. This front that came through today was didn't really produce very much, considering what the models were doing with this for the last several days. We thought this was going to be a fairly sizable rain producer, and all sorts of flash flood watches were put up last night for today. And yeah, there were some areas in central and southern central New Jersey and southern New Jersey that had flash flood warnings up this morning, and did get into some heavy showers and thunderstorms. But there were a lot of areas that were forecast to be in this zone of heavy downpours and thunderstorms, and it just never really materialized. There were a few severe thunderstorm warnings that popped up late this afternoon, but that was about it. And going into next week, I think the humidity starts to come up a little bit on Monday, but more so on Tuesday, when it could go up close to 90 again for my area before the next week front goes by. And with regards to the longer term, we are still going to be, it looks like the models want to go with this idea of a trough in the east and a ridge in the west. Now, what would make, by the way, let me just put this question out there. Here's the wider view. So what would make the system that's off the Carolina coast, what would cause that to be more of a threat for the Northeast, for example? And here's the issue. We'll put it up in the paint box. And I'll bring that back up here, so hang on one second. Okay, so I put up the jet stream here, the upper air jet stream forecast, 18,000 foot, 500 millibars for Wednesday, July 11th. Okay, Wednesday morning. Here's the issue. Yes, you do have a trough in the east. Okay, and here it is. All right, right there. And yes, you have a ridge in the west. Okay, right in here. There's your upper high. Okay, but in order for this to be an issue for the eastern states, you would need this ridge to be further to the left. In other words, it'd have to be further west than where it's being indicated now. It is too far to the east. It would have to be something more like this, okay? Pushed out more to the west, so that this next trough, instead of dropping into the northeast near the coast, drops in further west, okay? Perhaps dropping in somewhere back through here. I have this drawn a bit, on the broad side, but that would then maybe you could make an argument, if that were the case, that this thing could wind up moving northeastward or northward closer to the coast. You would need that ridge in the west to be stronger and further to the left. That does not appear to be happening here. None of the models that I looked at today would suggest that as a possible outcome. This is why I'm not really too overly concerned about this being an East Coast threat in the long term. So bear that in mind. Unless we see some sort of radical change in the models over the weekend, I'm not really too worried about this being problematic. So we'll come back to that upper air now and go forward, moving through next week and beyond. As that trough lifts out, you'll notice another one kind of spins around across southern Canada, north of the Great Lakes, and you still have this general idea of troughing in the east and more of a ridge in the west. But the ridge in the west is very flat. It's kind of oriented east-west. So is the ridge in the Atlantic Ocean. It's kind of on the flat side, and you've got this fairly active Canadian jet stream coming down. As long as this remains the case, folks, as I've been saying for many days, this would prevent long duration heat waves in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. Could it get hot for a day or two? Absolutely. Could it get humid for a day or two? Of course. Could it get hot and humid for 7 or 8 or 9 days in a row? No, that won't happen. Not unless you get that ridge to come back in the eastern part of the United States. Otherwise, you're going to see weather fronts coming through every 3 days or so. That's probably a pretty good measure of frontal activity, and that should take care of it. So let me just really quick, we'll look at the extent of severe weather tonight, and there really isn't a whole lot happening when we look at the Storm Prediction Center's severe weather profile. We're done in the Northeast, the Great Lakes, the northern areas of the Ohio Valley, back over into the middle and upper Mississippi Valley and upper Midwest. Very little going to be happening here with all this beautiful dry air around. You've got a general area of thunderstorms to the south of that, and even that line will get pushed further south, and some activity going on. This radar, by the way, as of 6:15 p.m. Eastern, so if you are watching this later, please be sure to check your local National Weather Service office, weather.gov, for all the latest information, and a very, very small area of marginal risk that's being shown up in through northern Montana. By the way, what's very interesting is that while all of this is going on in the Atlantic, we have very little happening in the Pacific. The last of Fabio, the hurricane, is well east of the Baja Peninsula, and you can see it here. That's all that's left of it, really. It's just this sort of very broad low pressure area. And many times when you have a in the activity, when the Pacific is sending you one storm after another, the Atlantic is usually pretty quiet. and the reverse is true. When the Atlantic is quiet, when the Atlantic is busy, the Pacific is quiet. And it was just kind of interesting this week after seeing the Pacific rather busy this month, taking us up through the 6th named storm. It shut down earlier this week with new systems coming out, and just as it shut down, the Atlantic woke up. And that's because basically the upper air winds that tend to favor the development on the Pacific side tend to be unfavorable for development on the Atlantic side. Doesn't always work that way. When we get deep into the hurricane season, sometimes you can see storms on both sides, but a lot of times when one side's active, the other side is not. And I think that's where we're at this stage of the game. So I'm coming back now to you guys on the board, and give me 1 second here just to run through all the chat. Good. By the way, good to see everybody here on this Friday. Hope everybody had a great day. Dio, Priscilla, Antonio Tejada, hi to you. Delvin is here. Ben Moynes, hi to you. Nice to see a few new folks on the chat board. Johnny Quest, Stephen Franco, Doodlefingers here, Mirtha Gunter, Michael Beryl, you haven't been around for a while. Nice to see you. K-Kins 100 got hit with torrential rain twice here in Mercer County in New Jersey. Did see that this morning. Got pounded. You had that flash flood. The flash flood warnings up when I woke up this morning for some of the central New Jersey counties. Tim Day, what do you think happens to Beryl once it passes Jamaica? I think it makes it a little more favorable environment and strengthens. The problem with figuring out a storm like this is because of its really small nature, this could disappear and just into an open wave over a matter of hours. I don't know. That's a big variable here. At the moment, you want to lean with the idea that the global models are going to be correct with its wind shear when it gets into the toward the Leeward Islands, and that it should weaken. But it's kind of surprised so far. So I'm not going to rule out the possibility that this thing could survive as an entity for a while as it moves into the Caribbean and heads westward. But it's got to get there first, and a small system like this could disappear just as quickly as it appears. Scott Briller, thank you very much for hitting Super Chat. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Philly stations are predicting a 5-day heat wave Thursday through Saturday. I think you disagree? Well, let me say this, okay? Philadelphia being further south, this might be a situation where temperatures might get close to 90. I think Tuesday we could see temperatures close to 90. The next weather front doesn't have the same kind of push as this one does. What it will do is probably lower the dew points somewhat. I don't know that it's going to push. You go south of Philadelphia down into the northern mid-Atlantic, 90 or better is certainly going to be probable there through the middle of next week. From north of there, it might be problematic. And I have to say, as a whole, when you look at what we just went through with this heat wave in terms of what was being advertised by models going into it and what we turned out having, is that it underperformed in terms of temperatures. So I wonder whether it's going to underperform this time around. And the fact that the soil moisture content in a lot of these areas remains very high, we've seen models come back as we've gotten closer to these warm stretches that we've had where the numbers go lower and lower. So I'm not in complete disagreement that you might be able to string 90-degree days from Tuesday through Friday of next week, but I don't know how much above 90 you're going to be. And I'm going to say that it would probably be a lot worse, a lot less of an issue than what we just went through. Let's see. William Huber, Joe, need a cold front on my pool before I get a tropical storm form over it. Is it that warm? My pool got to about low 80s. I imagine that this air mass coming down and the low humidities that we're going to have this weekend and temperatures in the 70s tomorrow is going to cool my pool off. I am not going to be happy about that. Johnny Quest, another 1.5 inches of rain. It doesn't stop for you, does it? And hope no tropical storm system comes into our area. If we do, we have a big problem. I would argue. I would say your chances of getting impacted by this system off the southeast coast are low. As I see it right now, I think it winds up responding to that trough to the north and going out to sea. I don't think it's going to make it be something that moves in northwestward and just keeps on going northwestward, at least from what I'm seeing right now. So keep my fingers crossed for you, because I know how much rain you've gotten over the last number of weeks. I think you've gotten basically almost a whole year's worth of rain over the last 3 months, on the order of about, I think you said 40 or 45 inches. I think the number was 42. Timothy Veltman does feel, oh good, you're telling me you're feeling better out where you are in upstate New York. Your air is coming to me. Last I checked, the dew points here were still pretty high, but the winds had all gone around to the northwest, so it's just a matter of time before my dew points drop off. Anthony Orr, would it be fair to say if Beryl size was average size, the environment around the cyclone wouldn't support it? Yes, I would, because the environment surrounding Beryl right now is a ton of dry air, and the fact that it's so small is not. It basically is, the circulation of the hurricane is cut off from that dry air. It's kind of sitting in its own little cocoon of tropical moisture, and it survives with the strength that it has as long as it stays small. Because if it were to grow in size, the circulation were to expand, you'd start to see that dry air getting entrained in it. So it's the very fact that this is a small system is the reason why it is what it is. If it were bigger, we never would have gotten to this point, in my opinion. Ruru, the grandson, is fine. Probably will see him one day early next week. Fingers crossed on that. John Trabacchino, you don't want to see a hurricane unless it was Milton Bear. Okay. Yeah, no worries for you. This is, these early season systems usually don't produce problems. And again, with that upper pattern, as I showed you earlier with the trough, unless the ridge were in the west, were further to the west, unless the trough in the east were further to the west and were allowed to dig a bit further to the south, then you would have a problem. I really don't think you're going to have an issue with this. Okay, so let me tell you right now what we're planning. Hopefully he's around and answers my email. Actually, it wasn't me who sent the email, but Joe Rayo sent an email to Levi Cowan of Tropical Tidbits. So we're going to try and get him on tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show on Facebook at 9:15. But if not tonight, maybe we'll try and get him one day next week. But we'll see. Hopefully that could happen. And I'm trying to get that part of the equation underway, where we bring in some guests. I would love to have Levi on, because maybe he can explain some of the reasons behind the smallness of Beryl, and a number of other things. He's very, very good at the dynamics of the that are in play at the tropics. That's his specialty. And we could also talk about the system, obviously, off the southeast coast. He does have a new video that he put up on his website, tropicaltidbits.com, or you can go to his YouTube channel and take a look at that. So we'll see what happens at 9:15. Like I said, if we don't have him on today, we'll try to get him on at some point in the coming weeks. Don't think there's too much else happening, so let me just thank those of you who have supported my channel by using the Amazon link that's on the descriptor to this live stream and on the descriptor to this video. If you're watching it later on tonight, if you use that link to shop on Amazon to buy your stuff, Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin so I can get myself a couple of cigars. We are a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates Program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for this channel to earn some fees from Amazon by linking to Amazon.com and the affiliated sites. I just wanted to just disclose that. Thank you, those of you who have hit Super Chat along the way. Really appreciate that as well. And with that, let's just say that we will see you tomorrow. We'll be live streaming this weekend, and I'll update you, of course, on all the goings-on with the tropical depression off the southeast coast of the United States and Hurricane Beryl. When tropics are active, my live streaming gets a little bit more active. So be sure to have your notifications set that you'll get, you'll know when I'm going on. And I think that's just about it. The Joe and Joe Weather Show tonight at 9:15 on my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Cioffi. Have a great evening and a great weekend.